Wiped out. Hey, I'm Steve. It's good to have you guys here at One Hope, and we are going to continue on in our series in Mark. It's been a fun series. We're coming to the end. Is anybody feel a little discombobulated? Because if you know that, if you've been here, you know that we're talking about or leading up to talking about the cross of Jesus, and that's not always it's a good thing, but it's not always fun to talk about. At the same time, we're inching closer and closer to Christmas. And so at the same time, we're talking about the cross, and then we're going to turn around and talk about the manger. It's going to be really weird, but this is what I've prayed. I've prayed that together, as we're going through that we would begin to see, because of the two events, the humble nature of Jesus who by his Father's desire, left heaven and came down to earth to walk among us as a person, as a human being, to understand what we go through, to hang out, to walk in our shoes. And then eventually, after a number of years on the planet, 30 or 33 or how many you want to say, he obediently went to the cross and humbled himself once again and went to the cross for us and took our sin upon himself. And so the two things move together. I hope that your heart is exploding by thinking, oh my gosh, God is so humble to reach out to me because he loves me, he cares for me, and he wants a relationship with me. He wants me back. And so that's my prayer. So pray that for yourself, pray that for me, and hopefully this Christmas we're going to celebrate like never before. Let me kind of dive into this passage in Mark. Last week, if you were with us, you know that there were three trials. We didn't talk about the three trials before the Jewish leaders. We only talked about two. A guy named Annas, who was the high priest, and then Caiaphas, who was the present high priest. And basically, they're railroading Jesus. I could have said that last week, and we could have been out of here in 10 minutes. They're railroading Jesus. Nothing about what they did was legal. In the Jewish system, they're not allowed to have a trial when it's dark. The sun has to be up because darkness is a place where people do rotten things. And so they did rotten things. They're supposed to have witnesses that would come forward that would literally have a good witness, a story to tell, and they couldn't find a witness amongst them. Every time they said something, they were different. You have to have two witnesses that agree with each other. You never have to call for or confess anything about yourself. You don't have to testify against yourself. And there's always has to be a large number of people who are together, and they were just getting a few people together to railroad Jesus. But now they got to do something legal so they can go to Pilate so they can hopefully get this guy killed, right? That's their goal. They've been trying to kill him for a long time. They're finally getting close. So this is where we start in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15. And as I'm reading, you're going to kind of see the sort of, at least part of the picture. Very early in the morning, the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of religious law, the entire high council, met to discuss their next step. They bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replied, "You have said it," meaning yes. Then the leading priests kept accusing him of many crimes, and Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they are bringing against you?" But Jesus said nothing, much to Pilate's surprise. Now, it was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner, any one the people requested. And one of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas, a revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising. The crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release a prisoner as usual. He said, "Would you like me to release to you this king of the Jews?" For he realized by now that the leading priests had arrested Jesus out of envy. But at this point, the leading priests stirred up the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. And Pilate asked them, "Then what should I do with this man you call king of the Jews?" And they shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him." So to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. As Barabbas, his tongue acts better than he does. I don't know, the tongue thing grosses me out enough to mention it a number of times. It's so gross. But I'm trying to think of what are they trying to do? They're trying to make Barabbas out to be disgusting, right? And that's how it works. And it's amazing that he goes free and Jesus is condemned. Now, we're going to get to that, but first, I'm going to walk through a number of the gospel accounts of this event. In the early days, back in February and March, when we were starting this series in Mark, we often looked at all of the gospel accounts of certain events, and we haven't done that for a while. But this one's in particular, because there's so much more added by the other gospel writers, by Matthew and Luke and by John, that I want to bring that out. And for the most part, like I often do, just read the Bible to you and get a part of the story that maybe you haven't seen before. I was surprised, I think, when I went through this, that Jesus actually stood before 6 different people. 3 times he would go before the Jewish leaders, twice completely illegal. The 3rd time he was already railroaded, so it didn't matter. The moment the sun came up, they voted, boom, he's gone. He's off to Pilate. Then he stands in front of Pilate, then another leader, and then back to Pilate for his fate to be sealed. 6 times he stands before them, and for the most part, he has to endure spitting, mocking, accusations, false accusations. He's beaten a number of times. And yet, for the most part, he just remains silent. And for me, it's like, what on earth is he doing? Why is he silent in this moment? Why isn't he speaking up for himself? But let's get into Mark. And we'll move through a lot of the gospel passages, and I'll try to tell the whole story of this event where Jesus comes before Pilate. Like I said, it was early in the morning where the leading priests and the elders and the teachers of the religious law, the entire Sanhedrin, the group of 70 plus the high priest, 71 people who would come together as the legal body of the Jewish nation, and they would decide this guy's fate. They met to discuss their next step, and they bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to Pilate, the Roman governor. Now here Luke kind of helps us understand what the charges were against Jesus. What are these guys bringing to try to get Jesus crucified, killed by Pilate? They began to state their case. This man has been leading our people astray by telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government. Now, if you were with us a number of weeks ago, did Jesus really say that? He said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God. Did he say, don't pay your taxes? I mean, if he said, don't pay your taxes, I would have heard it. I would have followed that gladly. But he didn't say that. So they're lying. And they said, by claiming he is the Messiah, a king. Now, did he say that? He did say that. And what did they do? If you remember last week, the guy tore his robes. He's blaspheming, never dreaming that, wait a second, maybe he's confessing the truth, and I should bow down and worship him instead of call him a blasphemer. But so they bring these charges in front to Pilate. And Pilate kind of is wondering, I'm sure he doesn't think very highly of these chief priests, and especially that they're bringing this guy to him. And he asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus replied, you have said it. Now, once again, I said that a person didn't have to testify on behalf of himself. He could remain silent. And so when he says that, he says, what you've said is true. I'm not really going to answer that question. But it's true. And then the leading priest kept accusing him of many crimes. I mean, like, what else did they get him for? Oh, I mean, it's horrible. He was healing the sick. He was casting out demons. He was raising the dead. Like, well, that's not, what on earth could they have gotten on Jesus? They kept accusing him of many crimes, and Pilate asked them, aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they're bringing against you? But Jesus said nothing. He just remained silent. And Pilate just looked and went, why doesn't he answer for himself? I'm thinking about this. Has anyone ever brought like false accusations against you? Has anyone ever told something about you that's not true? Does that ever happen? And what do you usually feel like doing? Justice. I gotta set the record straight. I gotta tell somebody what's true and quit this guy lying about me or this person from spreading these rumors about me. And yet Jesus is just standing there over and over and over and letting it all happen. And is he passive? Well, no, he's not. I don't know if you remember this, but like when they were in the garden and the soldiers came, the guards from the temple came, and they were going to take him and seize him, and Judas came and kissed him, and then Peter, seeing what was happening, he just drew the sword and sliced off the dude's ear. What did Jesus say? Hey, put that away. Do you not know that in this moment I could have legions of angels come to my defense? It's not like I can't take care of myself. It's not like if I wanted to, I could fight back. I'm choosing not to. I'm choosing to remain silent. I think Jesus knows that what he's going to do is going to enable us, all of us, to step back into a relationship with him. And for that, he will remain silent and let it happen. Pilate turned to the leading priests and to the crowd and said, I find nothing wrong with this man. He'll say this 3 or 4 times. I think Luke is trying to help us understand. You got to know that Jesus was absolutely innocent, and Pilate knows it. He said, I find nothing wrong with this guy. But then they became insistent. He's causing riots by his teaching wherever he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee. And Pilate, what? From Galilee? Have you ever been in a really sticky situation and you found out that you could actually pass the buck? It's like, ooh, I can get this off my plate. I don't like what's going on here. I don't like the crowd. I don't like the season, the Passover season. These Jewish people get all crazy when this happens. And so what? He's from Galilee? Oh, he's a Galilean? So he asked, and when they said that he was, Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas. Now, I don't know if you remember Herod Antipas. He's one of the tetrarchs, so he takes care of the Galilee and Perea, basically the Galilee where Jesus was raised and did his first bit of ministry. That's where Herod Antipas rules. And so he's up in the just above the Sea of Galilee, and he's wanted to get to know Jesus, but probably the most notorious thing that Herod Antipas has ever done is that he beheaded John the Baptist. That was a number of months ago. But if you remember, John the Baptist would come to Herod Antipas because Herod Antipas took his half-brother's wife and married her. That's not good. Just saying. Don't do that. And John was saying, what you're doing is not right. And so Herod Philip's wife, his ex-wife, Herodias, did not like this. And so she didn't like John the Baptist at all. And so there's this party, and Herod Antipas is having this incredible party, and everybody's there, and his stepdaughter dances, and everybody loves it. And he says to her, oh, man, that was awesome. I will give you up to half of my kingdom, anything you want. Name your, and she goes off to her mom, and, hey, what would you like, Mom? And she says, I want him to bring John the Baptist's head on a platter. So Herod Antipas is a violent guy, right? He beheads John the Baptist, and that's probably his claim to fame, his notorious deed. He is a mean cuss. He is violent. He is angry. And now Pilate can send him off. So he sent him off to Herod Antipas because Galilee was under his jurisdiction, and Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. Isn't that amazing? And this is how I think it seems to work out. And I'll maybe just insert this right now. What I've noticed oftentimes is when I'm reading through the Bible and thinking about the cultural things that are going on at the time, I always, like in the back of my mind, think, wow, it's amazing that happened at that certain time when those events were taking place. I wonder if God had anything to do with that. A lot of scholars talk about the idea of Rome being in power before Jesus came on the planet, and their soldiers creating this vast array of network of highways, of roads. I mean, you can go anywhere from Rome all the way east, all the way to China because of the roads that they put together. And so they have this, they have a great road system just before Jesus shows up, dies on the cross, creates followers who now need to go and take the gospel to all areas of the world, and they have these wonderful roads to do it. It's like, God, did you have anything to do with that? And the other thing is, I've always noticed that during the time of Jesus, there was a certain way that people were trained in how to follow God. There was a guy who was like the rabbi, the head person, and then these disciples who would follow him and learn from his life. And they didn't just like come together like this and have somebody drone on for minute after minute and bore people. They actually hung out together. They spent time together. They were always together. People could watch somebody's life, the good and the bad. Jesus was always good, by the way. Rabbis weren't all those perfect. But they would just spend time with them. They would pray together. They would read the scripture together. They would go out and serve people together. And so they were always in this training regimen. And I wonder, God, did you have anything to do with that? Did you have something to do with that? Is that how we're supposed to? So all these things are always interesting to me. It's like, maybe God is behind some of these things. The funny thing of Herod Antipas being in the city at the time, and so Jesus goes off to him, and you think that he's going to get punished, and you might even think he's going to lose his head, but Herod doesn't do that. In fact, he was delighted to see Jesus because he had always heard about him, and he wanted to see a miracle. He wanted Jesus to do a miracle in front of him. So he asked question after question, and Jesus, once again, just remained silent. He wouldn't answer. He wouldn't perform a miracle. He wouldn't do anything that Herod Antipas wanted. And so at that same time, while he's there getting drilled by Antipas, the chief priests and all these other guys, the teachers of the law, they're hurling insults and shouting their accusations at Jesus. So he's getting it from literally all areas, every angle. The Jewish people, the Roman people. He's enduring all that. Then Herod and his soldiers began mocking and ridiculing Jesus. I mean, everyone is ridiculing. Everyone is deriding him. Everyone is mocking him. Finally, they put a robe on him. Eventually, they'll put a crown of thorns on him. And, "Hail, Jesus." And Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is God in the flesh. Jesus is just sitting there taking that. Trust me, if I was God, no, I wouldn't do that. So he sends him back to Pilate. Pilate calls everybody together, the leading priests, the other religious leaders, along with all the people, and he announces this verdict. And he said this verdict before, but this is now the ultimate. This is it. You brought this man to me, accusing him of leading a revolt. I have examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence, and I find him innocent. He's not done anything. He is absolutely innocent. Sent him off to Herod, and he concluded the same thing. Send him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for the death penalty. So I'll have him flogged, and then I'm going to release him. And they did not like that. No way, you're not releasing this guy. This huge roar comes up from the crowd, and with one voice they shout, "Kill him and release Barabbas to us." Barabbas? Barabbas? Seriously, Barabbas? But Pilate argued with them once again because he wanted to release Jesus. He wanted to release him. He believed he was innocent. He believed he had done absolutely nothing wrong, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the third time, he demanded, "Why? What do you have against this guy? Why do you want to kill him? All he's done is good. All he's done is heal those who were sick, bound up those who were brokenhearted. He made blind eyes see. He made deaf ears hear. He took a leper and made him perfectly, instantly cleansed. Took somebody who was paralyzed, raised him up so he could walk. He took a little girl who was dead and raised her back to life. What on earth, what crime has he committed? He's only done good. I found no reason to sentence him to death, so I have him flogged and then I'll release him. And then they realize the loophole. He says, wait a second, there's a loophole. I can get this guy free. Because he wanted to get him free, right? He wanted to release him. It was the governor's custom each year during the Passover celebration to release one prisoner. And I have to wonder, is this God's idea? Is this the way that God introduces something that we're supposed to look at? During the Passover season, they released one prisoner, anyone the people requested, and one of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas, a revolutionary, a thug. He committed murder in an uprising. In fact, he was the kind of Messiah that people were looking for. He was going to come as a zealot and attack the Romans, and he was, with violence, kind of throw off their rule, and he was going to come in. He wanted the zealots to come and rule Israel. That's the kind of Messiah they wanted. It's not what they got. The crowd went to Pilate, asked him to release a prisoner just as usual. Would you like me to release to you the king of the Jews? Pilate asked. And it's interesting, because we've seen him trying to release Jesus over and over and over again, right? Now, how many of you have wives? Because this is an interesting part of the story. It's usually in the movies all the time. His wife had a dream the night before that a righteous man, an innocent man, would come before him, and she said, this dream has caused me so much pain, so much anguish. I want you to make sure that you release them. Now, if you have a wife, you go, yes, dear, right? That might be why it was. Now, I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night. I want you to just leave this innocent man alone. And I wonder, what is God up to, right? What is God trying to show us? But this is from John, the Gospel of John. And I studied this a number of years ago and saw something for the first time that I thought, I have never seen this before. Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. They're turning political on him. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. They're trying to bait him so that he has to do something, or else he's not a good Roman. He's not a good subject of Caesar. When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform that is called the Stone Pavement. It was now about noon on the day of preparation for the Passover, and Pilate said to the people, look, here is your king. And what did they say? It was always my understanding, every time I would read it, I maybe just didn't see it. And for years and years, all I thought was, they said, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Yet John shows a different phrase. Away with him. Away with him. The NIV says, take him away. Now, a number of years ago, I started going to Israel every other year for a while and started looking into the Old Testament texts and really trying to understand from a Jewish perspective, what did Jesus, how was he supposed to come? Like, what was the kind of Messiah they were looking for? What were the images that they would have seen before Jesus showed up that they maybe missed and they could have seen in Jesus? And I don't know if you know this, but there's a time called the Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, where the high priest comes out with two goats. I don't know how the goats are determined, which one is which, but with one goat, the high priest sets his hands on its head, usually holds the horns, and then places the sins of the people of Israel on the goat, and then slices its neck, and the blood flows, and in the shedding of the blood, the sins are forgiven, are gotten rid of. And so that's one of the goats. There's another goat, and it's called the Azazel goat. And on that goat, the high priest sets his hands once again on the horns or the head of the goat. And then that goat is let to escape out of the city. They take him away. If you know the phrase, the scapegoat, that's where that comes from. That this goat that was shed, the blood was shed, and now the sins are forgiven. This goat took the sins away out of the city. They usually push him off a cliff to make sure he doesn't live and run back into the city, because you don't want to see that goat once he's gone. Once your sins are taken away, you don't want to see him again, right? So I started looking at this phrase, and I don't know if you remember that when Jesus was crucified, they had a sign above his head, and one was written in Latin, one was in Greek, and one was in Hebrew. And that's so weird because, like, those are the languages I've studied, which it's so bizarre. They're just not fun languages to understand or to know. But it helped me in the sense of, wait a second, if they're literally screaming, take him away, and they're Jewish folks, they're saying the word Azazel, which is the name of the goat that takes sin away. And so this is kind of what I understood. Okay, so if they all have different languages, usually the pilot would speak in Latin or maybe in Greek, and then the other people are speaking Hebrew, and they all know each other's language. And so they're actually yelling out, Azazel, take him away. And then the Greek word, which is just funny, the Greek word is Aaron. Now, for us, that means nothing, but if you're a Jewish person, Aaron, we say in English, he was the first high priest. And so you got people yelling, Azazel, take him away, Aaron. Now, we're going to do this because it's fun. So you have to yell really loud, okay? So you're going to be the Azazel people. I don't know where you demark. I don't know. You choose. In the middle here, you're going to be, take him away. And you guys are Aaron. Okay, so understand, there are a lot of Jewish people, but there's the high priest, Caiaphas is there, probably Annas is there, the other chief priests, people who know the scripture, people who know about this Azazel goat that's taken away. And when you do it, we're going to do count of 3, and then you'll do it for about 10 seconds, and you'll be really loud, okay? What are you guys? Very good. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay. Now, if you are the chief priest or the high priest, if you're somebody who knows the Old Testament scriptures and you hear Azazel, take it away, you gotta like, oh my gosh, this is the real Messiah. He's confessing the truth. He's real. We should bow down and worship this guy. We can't kill him. How did they miss that? How did they miss that? Like, I remember kind of talking about the first time, and there was a Jewish guy. His name was Aaron. And he had grown up Jewish, but had trusted in Christ. And he said, no one has ever said that before. How would they? And I went, I don't know. I think I would have caught that one. Now, Pilate, he's experiencing the same thing, and he's looking at these guys, and the Bible mentions something about these guys, the chief priest, the high priest. And Pilate knows that these guys are trying to have Jesus killed out of envy. And so maybe that's blinding their eyes. Maybe their understanding of who the Messiah was supposed to be is blinding their eyes to this. But for me, it's like so clear. He's the Messiah, and God has given them a picture of it right in front of them. How did they miss it? And then for me, it was like, I thought, is there anything I've missed? And then I realized there was. It's the story of Barabbas. Let me read this, the last part of Mark 15. At this point, the leading priest stirred up the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus. Pilate asked them, then what should I do with this man you call the King of the Jews? And they shouted back, crucify him. Why? What crime has he committed? But the mob roared even louder, crucify him. And so to pacify the crowd, probably the most painful part of this passage, to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified. This is what I didn't catch before, that there are two guys standing up there on trial for their life. They couldn't be more different than anyone in the Bible. Jesus has literally done absolutely everything right. He has done nothing wrong, and yet he's in chains. He's bound. Pilate literally holds his fate in his hands. but not really, right? He's very much in control. On the other hand, Barabbas is there, and he's a murderer. He's a revolutionary. He has killed people. He is a thug. He is a bad man. And I thought about that. How on earth can Barabbas go free? That's not justice. And then I thought about my own life and who I am. And the sin that so plagues my life, even though I've been following Jesus for a long time. And I remember the first time I realized who I was before a holy God. I mean, I don't know if you know my story. Grew up kind of in the church, but about 6th grade, going through confirmation, and I asked the pastor a bunch of questions. He had no answers for me. I was like, well, if you don't know, I'm not coming here. And I bailed. Through high school, was not a good person. I was sinful. I was selfish. I stepped on other people to get ahead. Through college, pretty much the same thing. Went into biology and became an atheist. And then, a really difficult area of my life, difficult event in my life, and I was in a valley. And I realized I wasn't in control of my life. I realized finally that, there's somebody else who's in control of my life. And on Easter Sunday, 1989, God revealed himself to me, revealed his love for me, revealed his grace to me. And I realized at that moment that I was a criminal, that I was guilty before him. And the pastor told me a story about Jesus, that he was innocent and he was bound up in the same chains that I was. He remained silent. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he allowed Pilate to condemn him. It wasn't Pilate, though. This was written before even the world began. God had taken care of this because God wanted me back. And in the same way, he wants you back today. I hope you understand that we're all criminals. We're all guilty before God because of the things we do and some of the things we don't do. And that's where I was. And to hear for the first time that even though the wages of my sin is death, separation from God, there is a gift, a free gift that comes in a relationship with Jesus Christ. And because he was innocent, yet took my place as a criminal, I can now be found innocent. It's not just that he took my sin upon himself, he actually placed his goodness, his righteousness on me. And he can do that for you. I don't know where you're at spiritually. I hope you've come to the realization that you are guilty before a holy God. But more than that, I hope you know that Jesus took your place, took your punishment, took your sin so that you could be set free. Would you like to be set free? Let's pray.